The dawn of the 20th century was a period of intense imperial rivalry. In the vast expanse of Northeast Asia, the ambitions of two empires, Russia and Japan, were on a collision course. Russia, a colossal power stretching across two continents, sought a warm water port on the Pacific, a strategic necessity for its growing navy and trade. This ambition led it directly into conflict with Japan, an island nation that had undergone a startlingly rapid modernization. Japan viewed Russian expansion in Manchuria and Korea as a direct threat to its own security and its burgeoning sphere of influence. Tensions, long simmering, finally boiled over. The Russo-Japanese War erupted in February 1904, a conflict that would reshape the global balance of power. Japan initiated hostilities with a daring surprise attack on the Russian Pacific Fleet stationed at Port Arthur, in modern-day Dalian, China. The attack was a partial success, bottling up the Russian fleet and setting the stage for a prolonged siege. With its Far East fleet effectively neutralized, the Russian High Command in St. Petersburg made a decision of immense consequence. Tsar Nicholas II ordered the formation of the 2nd Pacific Squadron to be drawn from the Baltic Fleet. This armada was tasked with an almost impossibly arduous mission to sail over 18,000 nautical miles from the Baltic Sea, around Africa, across the Indian Ocean, and into the Far East. Its objective was to relieve the besieged Port Arthur, link up with any remaining Russian naval forces, and decisively defeat the Imperial Japanese Navy. The command of this fleet was given to Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvensky. He was a stern disciplinarian, faced with a monumental challenge. The fleet itself was a heterogeneous collection of vessels. It included brand new battleships of the Borodino class, but also older, slower ships, and various cruisers and support vessels. The crews were a mix of veterans and hastily assembled reservists, many of whom were poorly trained and demoralized. The long voyage began in October 1904, a journey that would test the limits of men and machines. The journey was a nightmare of logistical and diplomatic hurdles. Coaling stations were few and far between, and British neutrality, favoring their Japanese allies, meant many ports were closed to the Russians. The fleet had to rely on a fleet of German colliers, a slow and cumbersome process. The Dogger Bank incident in the North Sea, where the nervous Russian fleet fired on British fishing trawlers they mistook for Japanese torpedo boats, caused a major diplomatic crisis and further isolated Russia. The ships, designed for the cold Baltic, suffered in the tropical heat. Their hulls became fouled with marine growth, significantly reducing their speed. The sailors grew weary, their health deteriorated, and their morale plummeted. By the time they reached the waters of Southeast Asia, the fleet was a shadow of its intended strength. News of the fall of Port Arthur in January 1905 reached them en route, a devastating blow to their primary mission. The objective now shifted to reaching the port of Vladivostok, the only remaining Russian stronghold in the region. Meanwhile, the Imperial Japanese Navy, under the command of the brilliant and resolute Admiral Tugo Haihakiro, was waiting. Tugo's fleet was a modern, homogeneous force, primarily composed of British-built warships. The Japanese ships were, on average, faster and better armed than their Russian counterparts. They boasted a higher rate of fire and were equipped with superior rangefinders. A crucial technological advantage lay in their ammunition. The Japanese used Shimo's powder, a powerful and stable explosive that detonated on impact with devastating effect, often starting uncontrollable fires. In contrast, Russian shells were often duds or failed to explode properly. But Japan's greatest advantage was its people. Japanese sailors were exceptionally well trained, highly disciplined, and possessed a fierce fighting spirit. They had spent months conducting gunnery practice and tactical drills, honing their skills to a razor's edge. Admiral Togo had meticulously studied his opponent and correctly anticipated Rozhestvensky's likely course. He knew the Russians, desperate to reach Vladivostok, would choose the most direct route, the Tsushima Strait, the body of water separating Korea from Japan. Togo positioned his fleet to intercept them, turning the strait into a deadly trap. The stage was set for one of the most decisive naval battles in history. On the misty morning of May 27, 1905, the Japanese auxiliary cruiser Shinano Maru spotted the Russian fleet. The message was relayed via wireless telegraph, another key technology the Japanese used more effectively than the Russians. Enemy fleet sighted in square 203, the message read. Togo, aboard his flagship, the battleship Mikasa, calmly prepared for battle. He had instilled in his men a quiet confidence. The fate of the empire, he had famously signaled, rested on this one battle. As the two fleets steamed towards each other, the disparity in their condition was stark. The Russian ships, painted in high-visibility black, were grimy from their long voyage. The Japanese ships, painted a low-visibility gray, were pristine and ready. The weather was choppy, with a significant swell that would favor the more stable Japanese gun platforms. Admiral Rozhestvensky had arranged his fleet in a complex, unwieldy formation of two main columns. He hoped to protect his vulnerable transports and cruisers. Admiral Togo, observing the Russian disposition, saw his opportunity. In a move of incredible daring, he ordered his fleet to turn in succession across the front of the advancing Russian line. This maneuver, known as crossing the T or the Togo turn, was fraught with peril. As each Japanese ship made its turn, it would be exposed to the concentrated fire of the entire Russian fleet. But Togo trusted his gunners and the superior speed of his ships. The gamble paid off spectacularly. The Japanese ships completed the turn, bringing their full broadside batteries to bear on the lead Russian battleships. The Russians, in contrast, could only reply with their forward-facing guns. The battle began at 2:08 p.m. The Japanese flagship Mikasa opened fire, and the rest of the fleet followed suit. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the Russians. The Japanese gunnery was astonishingly accurate. A storm of high-explosive shells rained down on the lead Russian ships. The battleship Knyaz Suvorov, Rozhestvensky's flagship, was one of the first to be hit. Its command tower was struck, severely wounding the admiral and killing most of his staff. Fires raged across its decks, and its steering was knocked out, causing it to lurch out of the battle line. The battleship Oslabia, another modern vessel, was targeted by multiple Japanese ships. It was hit repeatedly at the waterline, took on a massive amount of water, and became the first modern battleship to be sunk by gunfire in open battle. It capsized and went down with the majority of its crew. The Russian formation dissolved into chaos. Without effective leadership, and with their lead ships crippled, the Russian captains were left to fight their own individual battles. The superior speed of the Japanese fleet allowed Togo to control the engagement, repeatedly recrossing the Russian fleet and concentrating his fire on one ship after another. The Borodino-class battleships, Imperator Alexander III and Borodino, fought valiantly but were systematically destroyed. The Shimo's powder in the Japanese shells turned their superstructures into infernos. As dusk began to fall, the main engagement of the battleships drew to a close. The Russian battle line was shattered, but for the terrified survivors, the ordeal was far from over. As darkness enveloped the strait, Togo unleashed his destroyers and torpedo boats. These small, fast vessels swarmed the scattered and crippled Russian ships in a series of relentless night attacks. The night was filled with the flash of explosions, the beams of searchlights, and the desperate cries of men. The Russian crews, exhausted from the day's battle, could offer little effective resistance. The battleship Siswai Veliki was torpedoed and later scuttled. The old armored cruisers Admiral Nakimov and Vladimir Monomakh were also hit, sank the next morning. The night attacks completed the destruction of the Russian fleet as a cohesive fighting force. By the morning of May 28th, the full extent of the Russian disaster was apparent. The sea was littered with wreckage and the bodies of sailors. Admiral Tugo's main fleet moved in to mop up the remaining Russian vessels. Rear Admiral Nikolai Nebogatov, who had taken command after Rozhestvensky was incapacitated, found himself surrounded. His remaining ships were old, slow, and low on ammunition. Faced with the hopeless situation, Nebogatov chose to surrender. He signaled to the Japanese, "I surrender." And Togo accepted, and the remnants of the once proud Baltic fleet struck their colors. A few Russian ships managed to escape the carnage. The fast cruiser Almaz and 2 destroyers reached Vladivostok. The cruiser Oleg and 2 others made it to the neutral port of Manila, where they were interned. Admiral Rozhestvensky, wounded and unconscious, was captured aboard the destroyer Biedovi. The Battle of Tsushima was one of the most decisive naval victories in history. The scale of the Japanese triumph was staggering. Russia lost 8 battleships, numerous cruisers and destroyers, and over 4,380 sailors were killed. Another 5,917 were captured. The Japanese, in stark contrast, lost only 3 torpedo boats and suffered just 117 killed and 583 wounded. Not a single Japanese battleship or armored cruiser was lost. The battle was a national humiliation for Russia and a major catalyst for the 1905 Russian Revolution, which shook the foundations of the Tsarist regime. For Japan, the victory was a moment of supreme national triumph. It confirmed Japan's status as a major world power and the preeminent military force in East Asia. The Battle of Tsushima was studied by navies across the globe, its lessons influencing naval doctrine, ship design, and strategy for decades to come. It demonstrated the vital importance of speed, long-range gunnery, well-trained crews, and decisive leadership in the new era of naval warfare. The echoes of the guns of Tsushima would reverberate throughout the 20th century. The world had been put on notice. A new power had risen in the East. The battle marked the first time a modern non-European power had defeated a European great power, a fact that resonated with burgeoning nationalist movements across Asia and Africa. It was a brutal, definitive end to a long and bloody war. The Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, would soon follow, formally recognizing Japan's victory. Togo Hayakiro became a national hero, revered for his strategic genius and calm demeanor in the face of overwhelming odds. The battleship Mikasa is preserved to this day in Yokosuka, a lasting monument to this pivotal moment in naval history. The victory, however, also fueled a growing sense of militarism within Japan, a path that would lead to further conflict in the decades that followed. The sun had truly risen on a new Japanese empire, its ascendancy sealed in the cold waters of the Tsushima Strait. The battle was a testament to meticulous preparation meeting a flawed and exhausted adversary. It was a story of technological superiority and human courage. It was a clash of old and new, of East and West. The Russian fleet's epic, doomed voyage had ended in utter annihilation. World's naval powers took careful note of the lessons learned. The age of the dreadnought was just around the corner. spurred by the very lessons of this battle. The importance of homogeneous fleets with all big guns was now undeniable. The strategic implications were immense, shifting power dynamics across the globe. Japan's victory was a source of immense national pride. The memory of Tsushima would be invoked for generations. The Russian sailors who perished were largely forgotten by their own government in the turmoil that followed. Their sacrifice was a footnote in the decline of an empire. The Japanese sailors, in contrast, were celebrated as heroes who had secured their nation's destiny. The battle was a brutal spectacle of modern industrial warfare. Sheer destructive power of the new naval guns was on full display. The fires on the Russian ships were said to have burned with a terrifying intensity. The sea itself seemed to be on fire at times. The psychological impact on the survivors was profound. Many were haunted by the experience for the rest of their lives. The battle was a stark reminder of the human cost of imperial ambition. It was a conflict born of greed and a desire for dominance. The outcome was a dramatic redrawing of the geopolitical landscape. Japan's naval prowess was now undisputed. The victory emboldened Japan's military leadership. It set a precedent for future military adventures. The path to the Pacific War in the 1940s can be traced back to this moment. The confidence gained at Tsushima was a double-edged sword. It led to both greatness and to eventual ruin. The battle remains a subject of intense study and debate among historians. Its legacy is complex and multifaceted. It is a story of triumph and tragedy, of innovation and obsolescence. The names of the ships, Mikasa, Suvorov, Oslibaya, have become legendary in naval lore. The tactics employed by Togo are still studied in naval academies today. The battle was a turning point in the history of warfare. It was the end of one era and the beginning of another. The world would never be the same again. The balance of power had shifted, irrevocably. The echoes of Tsushima continue to be felt even in the 21st century. It is a story that continues to fascinate and to instruct. The lessons of the battle are timeless. They speak to the importance of preparation, of technology, of morale, and of leadership. The Battle of Tsushima was more than just a naval engagement. It was a moment that changed the course of history. It was a brutal, violent, and ultimately decisive clash of empires. The fate of nations was decided in the cold, gray waters of the strait. The sun set on the Russian fleet and rose on the Empire of Japan. The world watched and learned. The age of European dominance was beginning to wane. A new world order was emerging from the smoke and fire of Tsushima. The battle was a harbinger of the conflicts to come in the 20th century. It was a glimpse into the future of warfare. And it was a story of human drama, of courage and of folly, played out on a grand and terrible scale. The final Russian surrender was a quiet, somber affair. The once mighty fleet was now a collection of battered, smoking hulks. The Japanese sailors looked on, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and elation. They had achieved the impossible. They had secured their nation's future. And they had written their names into the annals of history. The victory celebration in Japan was ecstatic. The entire nation rejoiced. But in Russia, the defeat was met with shock and anger. It was a national disgrace. The Tsar's authority was fatally undermined. The seeds of revolution had been sown. The battle was a stark lesson in the importance of sea power. It demonstrated that a nation's destiny could be decided by its navy. This lesson was not lost on the other great powers. A new naval arms race was about to begin. The world was on a path to even greater conflict. The Battle of Tsushima was a critical milestone on that path. It was a moment of profound change, a moment that would shape the destiny of the 20th century. The story of the battle is the story of a nation's rise and an empire's fall. It is a story of a clash of cultures and a clash of technologies. And it is a story that continues to resonate. A century later,